Welcome everyone to the last round game of the tournament called Chess for Everyone that's happening in Kerala, India. On the left of your screen with the white pieces is Grandmaster Peter Kiriakov from Russia. He's rated 2477 and he's facing the youngster Janaki, who's rated 1842, and she is born in 2014, so she's just 11 years old, and she's playing on board 2 in the last round, which is incredible. This is the 8th round, so Janaki is on 6 points out of 7. She castles here. We have the Queen's Gambit declined, and Peter puts his bishop on d3. Let's see how Janaki continues. She puts her pawn on b6. This is also one interesting way to play, where you put your bishop on b7 and pawn to c5. Although usually pawn to c6 is preferred much more than pawn to b6. Knight to f3, the bishop comes out to b7, and it's a logical move. You have this bishop blocked by your own pawn, but your knight can sit on e4. You can prepare c5 because of the pawn on b6. The knight comes to d7. Very solid setup here. And I think a logical move now is just simply rook c1, taking the semi-open file. Peter Kiriakov, very experienced grandmaster, definitely would be fancying himself to win this game against the youngster and end the tournament on a high, win the tournament if he can. Pawn to c5, and now bishop f5 played. A very interesting move because you're putting pressure with this bishop on this knight, with this bishop on the knight on f6, and Janaki goes knight e4. She's being very direct here, offering a trade of bishops. Peter takes, bishop takes e7, and you take queen takes e7. That's the natural move. By the way, one thing which you should know about this tournament is that there's no entry fee for any of the players. That's why the name Chess for Everyone. It's just crazy what the organizers Premier Chess Academy have come up with. Peter, by the way, takes on d7, queen d7, and now pawn takes c5. And here you have to be very careful, because if you take back with the pawn, knight e4 is a free piece, which is the reason why Janaki has to take back with the knight. But now white is slightly better because the square on d4 is kind of an outpost, because the pawn on d5 is isolated. It's a weak pawn, you can attack it. The rook comes to d8, and white plays rook to d1. Against an experienced grandmaster, this is definitely torturous, because he'll simply keep on grinding. Rook to c8 played, but at the same time, these are the positions. If you are able to hold it together, you can gain those half points. Queen to e5, a nice move. The queen is well placed. The knight could come to d4. She plays queen e6, offering a trade. You can avoid the queen trade with queen h5, but Kiriakov goes knight to e2. He's going with his other knight to d4. One thing that I have liked about Janaki's play is that she's maintained quite a decent time on the clock. Knight takes e5, and you want to put the other knight on d4. Now black goes knight to e6, controlling the d4 square, also planning to trade rooks on the c file. The knight comes back to f3, and I think white would love to trade off the knights and play a good knight versus not so good bishop scenario. Rook takes rook, rook takes rook, and I think a very decent move is rook c8. Offering a trade of rooks. She plays it, rook to c8, and now you can avoid the rook trade with knight c3, but Kiriakov thinks, well, it's interesting to just trade and play this very nice endgame where you have a superior knight against a bishop. But truth be told, This endgame is not so clear. Let's see if he goes knight d4. No, he first plays knight to c3. He attacks the pawn on d5. Janaki can now defend with bishop b7 or knight c7. She goes bishop d7. And now maybe you can bring your king in. That's one way. The other is to just go knight b5. Attack the pawn on a7. And a5 played. If you played the move a6, then knight d6, suddenly, this position is not looking that great. These pawns are weak. So a5 played, and now knight to d4. Immediately offering a trade, and Janaki takes. You can take back with the pawn. That's possible. But taking with the knight makes more sense because now your knight has an outpost. This is a very interesting endgame because logically white should be better, but because there's only one weakness, that is the pawn on d5, it's very difficult to win for white. Objectively, if this is a drawn endgame, bishop goes back to c8. Let's see. Objectively it can be drawn, but against an experienced opponent, not so easy. You can see there Janaki looking a bit tensed and worried, and I think against an experienced opponent like Kiriakov, this might not be easy at all. King e7 played. And how do you want to place your king side pawns? Do you want to already start pushing? No, he goes king d3. You can already check the king, but Janaki goes king d6. What a great learning experience for the youngster for sure. a3 with the idea of pushing the pawn to b4 perhaps. Bishop d7, kind of making sure that the knight cannot jump to these squares. Pawn to g3 by Kiriakov. You want to play h4. I think g5 is not a bad idea here. She does it. A good move, I think, because you're placing the pawn on the opposite color of your bishop. Knight goes back to f3. And now you want to put your king on d4 and then start playing with your knight. Pawn to f6 played. And king to d4. So the king is immovable there from d4. But the real question is how to get rid of the king from d6. Also, if you notice, Janaki has been very smart to put all her pawns on dark squares so that all the dark squares are covered by her pawns and all the light squares by her bishop. So that's very nice. Bishop g6 has been played, capturing this diagonal. Knight to b3. One of the things that experienced grandmasters know is that sometimes you don't have to do anything in a position. You can let your opponent get impatient and make mistakes. You can let her time run. Like here, she's down to 14 minutes and she could go wrong. And that's how Peter is playing here. Now one threat could be knight c3 to attack the bishop and the pawn. So bishop drops back to e4 and knight c3, attacking the pawn and the bishop. You simply put your pawn on f3. Yeah, that's a good move. Knight to b1 and bishop comes back to e4, hitting the knight. Knight goes to d2. This time just attacking the bishop. The bishop drops back to g6. And now knight to b3 played. Bishop comes in to c2. And you have knight to c1. Bishop to b1. Janaki is down to 11 minutes while Peter has 28 minutes. You're on move, I think around 45. Bishop e4, knight c3. We've reached the same position again. Bishop f3. And now in order to make progress, what do you do here as white? Whoa, e4 played. And now Janaki takes with the pawn. I want to analyze bishop takes e4, but I'll do so after the game. Pawn takes pawn, knight d5. Now very important here to see both pawns are hanging. So e3 to attack the knight, and after knight e3, maybe just something simply moving the bishop, or a4 should be equal. But she goes f5 and she makes a mistake here, giving up the b6 pawn. Now threatening knight to c4 check to win another pawn. So somehow the experienced grandmaster has made a breakthrough. Janaki, well, she held her own so well until that point, but now her opponent is winning, and you can see the confidence. He's moving around. Bishop e2, a nice move. I think a very good idea now is just to play pawn to b4, but plays pawn to b3. Can black already start pushing kingside pawns with h5? Janaki plays king to c6, and now important move, knight d5 with the idea of knight e7. So many options, but goes knight c4, and that's a mistake by Kiriakov, because now just simply taking the knight could mean that black can actually hold here. And look at Janaki there. I mean, this pawn is hanging. She must take the knight. She has 3 minutes on the clock. She takes it. If pawn takes here, it's also not winning. She takes with the king. And this makes sense because you create an outside passer. h5, a mistake. The only way to hold this was g4. Again, requires deep analysis, which we'll do after the game. h5 does not cut the bill here, because now after b4, this is winning for white. You can see Kiriakov there. I mean, all his experience points to the fact that he is winning. Well, one way to begin is king d4 first, to threaten entering on e5 when black must stop the king, king d6. And now pawn to b4. I think you can already begin, but he goes h4, which is also a fine move. Just making sure that Janaki does not have any good options left. G takes h4. You could potentially have played g4 as well, and after b4 a4, but now after b5, this is winning position for white. So g takes h4, g takes h4. She moves her king to e6 to stop the king entering to e5, and it's time for now to create a passer on the queen side. This is known as the outside passer, and after pawn to a4 by Janaki, she is going to be one move too slow in this endgame race. With king d6, her king is trying to run after the b pawn, but Peter has calculated it all. King c6, and now king e5, king takes pawn, and white is just a bit too fast, because after king f5 takes here, king c5, king e4, king c4, f4, king b3, f5, king a3, f6, king b3, f7, a3, queen, and then you simply, the pawn is only reached till a2, and so Janaki resigns. And what a fight this was here. And look at Peter there. He's like, you know, he's talking about the fact that instead of putting the bishop on f3 and allowing e4, it was better to keep the bishop on e6, and then it's very difficult to win that position. This is very kind of the grandmaster to give the opponent this small tip, because you know, it's moments like this which can make you a stronger player, teach you a lot. And after e4, you can just go back to e7, and here this side, then the king goes there. Wow, that's that's grandmaster understanding there. But let's try to analyze a couple of key moments from this game. I'm pretty sure that these are super tough moments for even a strong player, so it is not actually anything against Janaki that she didn't find these moves, but it's definitely something that we can all learn from. Let's first go to this key moment where white played the move pawn to e4. Now it seems like after takes and takes, white should be better because you're threatening to come here. But after king e6, black is holding. And here's the point. After g4, you need to find the only move, which is a4. And after h3, you play b5. And after f3, it feels like black has run out of waiting moves, and this should be winning, because now if you go this way, then I come to f5. If you go king f7, I go king d5. But king d6, king f5. In fact, this even loses, so you have to be careful and just simply agree to a draw here with king e4 and king d6. But if king f5, then king d5, king f6, king c4, and at this point, it's actually black who manages to win by queening the pawn first. So bishop e4 was a little bit tricky to calculate, but if Janaki would have calculated this, she would have got the hardened draw. The next interesting position came where white was winning in the game, but played the move knight c4. This is a much tougher variation, but this is still a draw after king c4. And now this incredible move, pawn to g4. Janaki played the move h5 and later lost the game, but g4. And it's very difficult to explain this move actually. I think one of the ways to explain it is that you're clamping all three pawns. And after b4, which is a logical move, it's very important to play the move a4. Because with this, you keep your pawn on the queen side. Without this, it's lost. Like if you take AB, white wins. Next, I just simply come here and round up these pawns and win. But with the pawn on a4, you have the possibility to resist the white king, and only way for white to make progress is to give up the pawn. You wait here, king c6, and now when you enter, take king c5. This a pawn proves its worth because now you're coming to b3. f3 takes, king b3, and now it's actually black who's in very much time to hold the game. So this would have been a very, very difficult move to find g4. I think it's a great training exercise as well. Pawn to g4, and after pawn to g4, you have to also play this move, pawn to a4, giving white a protected passer, but in a way telling that there's absolutely no way to make progress. If you go here, I'll wait. And if you go king e3, I'll go king e5. And even if you push, I'm just in time. Let's say here, king takes f5, king e4, and just black is in time to hold the game. So I hope you learned something from this analysis, and kudos for Janaki to give such a tough fight.